Iktomi was not always called Iktomi. He had a different name. He was like a counselor because he was known for his wisdom. And there was something kind of odd about him too, though. And it had to do with his physical appearance. Half of his body was in motion, meaning it didn't really have a solid form. So as he walked, sometimes his eye might move in a direction where he really looks goofy. And so people would laugh. But they would calm down and they would apologize and say, I'm sorry. They would try to make him feel not bad. But when you first saw him, it just looked funny. So it was hard to not laugh. Well, after a time, that got to his head. And so he decided he's going to play a trick on some people. And it backfired horribly. And the result was that he lost his standing as a counselor and he became known as a trickster. So that's when his name changed to Iktomi. What I just said was a really short version because this is really, normally it's a long story. And it branches out into other stories and you learn all kinds of things. But I just want to focus in on the Iktomi character, yeah? So I'm just taking the very, very shortcut here. But it still explains to you that he wasn't always a trickster, but that he became that way. That shows you that people can fall from grace. So what he's teaching is duality. Duality is when you see everything in only two groups and you say, I like this one, so that's good. And then everything else that's different, you say that's bad. And everything is focused on that. So you see everything in life as only having two components. And when you only have two, you have the tendency to assign one a good label and the other one a bad label, and that's where you get into trouble. That's when you start thinking that positive is good and negative is bad. And that's not true. This universe is founded upon four elements. And they're not about which one is the best one. It's not like that. These four elements just work differently. They don't fight against each other or anything. They just work differently. And this is how the universe is created. So you see, it's not just two, it's more than two. Lakota Star Knowledge says it's going to be at least three. At least. Most of the times it's four, but at least three. And many times it's more than four. But it's never, 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 ever just two. So duality is when you lose something. Lakota Star Knowledge says there's at least three components to reality. In duality, there's only two. Well, that means you're missing something. That means when you're dualistic, when you're a racist, when you say your way is the only way, when you say your religion is the only religion, when you say your race is the best race, the chosen race, when you talk like that, you're dualistic. And since you only see two components to reality, that means you do not see the complete reality. And this is the problem of today, duality. That's the main problem. And in duality, we don't take the time to check things out. We just judge it right away. We look at something or somebody and we say, oh, I don't like that. So that's evil. It must be destroyed. My favorite line from that movie called Steel Magnolias. You are evil. It must be destroyed. Shoot. Anyway, this is the problem that we have today. Duality creates everything that's problematic for everything, actually. It's not just for humans, it's also the problem for plants and animals and that which moves and grows, because all creation is connected. These Iktomi stories are really cool because they work on several levels. The basic level is that it teaches you that if you do something, then these are going to be the consequences. Whatever that something is. If you're a guy and you fall in love with your mother-in-law and you run away with her, there's going to be certain consequences. And there's the Iktomi story like that. Yeah, it's just hilarious. But see, it's teaching you, don't marry your mother-in-law. It's possible to fall in love with your mother-in-law. When you look at the Tioshpae concept, the Tioshpae concept is where you have many mothers and many fathers. Let me explain it like this. Your mother and all her sisters are all your mothers, and they're equally important. All the husbands of these women are your fathers, and all the children from these marriages are your brothers and sisters. Now, your mother's brothers are your uncles. Their wives are your aunties, and their children are your cousins. That's your mom's side of the family. Okay, now let's go to your father's side. Your father and his brothers are your other fathers, and the wives of these men are your other mothers. The children from these marriages are your other brothers and sisters. Your father's sisters are your other aunts or aunties, depending on how you say that. The husbands of your aunties are your other uncles, and the children from those marriages are your other cousins. This is a Tioshpae. So in a Tioshpae, it is possible that, let's say, 10 years before you were born, let's say your mother had a sister. So your auntie is just 10 years older than you. But remember, this is a Tioshpae, so she's not your auntie. This is your mother's sister. That means that's your mother too. So you have a mother who's only 10 years older than you. Now, let's say that everybody grows up. Let's say you're 20 years old. Your mom that you were born from, let's say she's 42 years old. And your second mom is 30 years old. So your second mom is just 10 years older than you. Now you get married. And let's say your husband is 5 years older than you, which means he's 5 years younger than your second mom. So your second mom is still a young woman. And let's say your husband starts becoming attracted to your second mom. And then they have an affair. And they decide to take off. Because remember, she's just 5 years older than your husband. It's still very possible for a physical attraction. See what I mean? So in this way, your husband ran away with his mother-in-law. That's how that can happen in a Tioshpae. So you don't marry your mother-in-law. And there is an Iktomi story that's like that. It's really crazy. So let me go ahead and tell that story. Iktomi marries his mother-in-law. Oh boy. Okay. It's a similar situation to what I just explained. That Iktomi started to fall in love with one of his mother-in-laws. And one time, this mother-in-law was picking choke cherries out away from the camp. So Iktomi followed her, and then he tried to kiss her. And she slapped him. Because as a sign of respect, you're not supposed to talk to your parents-in-law. You don't even make eye contact. That is a sign of respect in Lakota culture. So the fact that Iktomi was really checking out his mother-in-law, he was already breaking tradition. So when he was trying to kiss this lady, she really slapped him. What do you think you're doing, you fool? And then slapped. He tried it again anyway. And he kept persisting until finally she gave in and they started kissing. And then she pulled away and she said, I can't do this. She said, I don't want to hurt my daughter. And Iktomi said, well, she'll never know. So every day they would meet in these bushes and they started to have sex. And Iktomi said, let's run away. And the mother-in-law said, I don't want to hurt my daughter like this. So then Iktomi said, I have a plan. He said, just wait for me here at these bushes tonight. He said, I'm going to come here and then we'll take off. So then that lady said, okay. And don't worry, your daughter will not be hurt. So she said, okay. So then Iktomi went home and he said to his wife, well, I'm going to go hunt some buffalo. So his wife said, okay. So he said, I'll be back when I get a big one, he said. So she said, okay. So he took off. And then he went to where his mother-in-law was, and then they took off. Nobody knows what happened to them. They never came back. Nobody even thought that maybe he ran off with his mother-in-law. Nobody even thought that because this rule is very strict. So it didn't even come to anybody's attention that maybe he took off with his mother-in-law. The people didn't even think of it because that rule is so strict. So he was gone. So Iktomi and his mother-in-law were living way out in the country by themselves. And then she got pregnant. She had the first kid. This kid was just ornery. Just in the head. Yeah? He's off. There's something wrong with this kid. He'd be walking around and bumps into a tree, and instead of going around the tree, he still tries to go through the tree. So this kid stands there and keeps bumping into the tree over and over and over till he gets tired and falls on the ground, falls asleep. That's the kind of kid that this child was. Something is wrong with this kid. 9 months later, she had another one. Same thing. This kid is goofier than heck. I mean, he's not a comedian. There's something wrong with these two kids. 9 months later, third one was born. This kept happening until she had 19 kids. Every 9 months. 19 kids. Jeez, it was getting difficult. There's always the baby crying. And there's something wrong with all of these kids. It's like there's a screw loose in their head. They're not violent. They're just off. And it's really hard because there's 19 of them. And so Iktomi says, we need help raising these kids. He said, let's go find a camp to live in, and maybe the people will help us with these kids. So the mother-in-law said, okay. And so they packed up what they had. And see, these kids, they never kept their hair brushed or anything. So their hair is just scraggly and they didn't even comb it or nothing. And their clothes are just tattered because the Iktomi is not even a good hunter. So this was a family of vegetarians. Their clothes were mostly made out of tree bark and weeds and things like that. They look just rugged. So Iktomi said, I know a camp. Let's travel by night so we'll get there faster. So they said, okay. all these kids started scattering. They were looking for butterflies, and it's nighttime. So they're just wandering around, bumping into trees, bumping into each other. And Iktomi was like, gee, many crackers, these, gosh darn it, what am I going to do about these kids? So somehow he found some vines, and he started to make a rope out of it. And then he caught his kids, 19 of them, and he tied their hands together, and then he tied each kid to each other at the waist. This way they can't take off. Yeah? And then they proceeded to walk towards this camp. Now Iktomi, he knew where he was going, but he didn't tell his mother-in-law. So they got close to this camp, and it was getting close to morning time now because they were walking all night. After 19 children, how many years do you think passed by? Pretty close to 15 years. It's more like about 14 and a half, but let's say 15 years had gone by since they left that camp. Now, the mother-in-law doesn't know where they're at because they were traveling that night. So Iktomi said, okay, I'm going to go into the camp and I'll introduce myself. Don't want them to get scared if we just all show up, he said. So I'll go in by myself and then I'll tell the people about our problem and then they'll come with me. Then they can help us with these children. So the mother-in-law said, okay. So Iktomi took off and he went to this cliff. Wasn't too high, but it was still a cliff. Maybe it's about 4 meters high. That's about 16 feet, something like that. Anyway, he went up to this cliff and then he threw himself over. And he kept doing that. And he climbed back up to the top and he threw himself over again. How come he's doing that? Huh? He's just climbing up this cliff and he throws himself over, hits the ground. He gets up and he does it again. He kept doing that until he was all bruised up. Then he tangled his hair, threw dirt in his hair, and his clothes were already torn. So then he walked to that cat. He's really staggering. People came, they surrounded him and said, hey, who's this guy? He said, hey guys, remember me? He said, I used to live here 15 years ago. He said, I went to go buffalo hunting, and here the enemy captured me, he said. So they were like, gee. They said, so yeah, the enemy captured me, and they made a cage out of tree branches. That was tough cage, he said. I couldn't even break up. They said, they made me do things. I was their slave, so they made me do all kinds of things. And I wanted to escape, so I decided I'm not going to eat anything. So I'm not going to eat anything, and I'm going to get really skinny so I can fit between the cage bars, between the tree branches. So this way he can squeeze himself between these tree branches that made this cage. So maybe about several days went by and geez, he was just bony, he said. So I managed to squeeze through the cage. And it was early in the morning. And so after I got out, he said, I managed to capture the whole tribe and I took them prisoners. They're right over there beyond that ridge, he said. They're all tied up, he said. So the people were really like, wow, this guy is a warrior and a half. See, Minnie. He captured the whole enemy tribe. Wow. So they really thought he was some kind of a super warrior. He said, yeah, they're just over there. They're all tied up. He said, well, I'm too tired. Can you guys go get them? I need to eat something, he said. So somebody brought him a piece of meat. It was the first time he ate meat in 15 years. Yeah, so he just gobbled it up. And then he laid down. I gotta take a rest, he said. I'm really tired. So these warriors went to that location And they found that lady, the 19 kids, all tied up. Because remember, he tied them together because they kept taking off, yeah? so, so the warriors, they looked at the prisoners and they said, "Gee, look at that, they're all kids. So I wonder what kind of tribe this is." And here, the mother-in-law, she recognized one of the men. And she said, "Hey, brother-in-law, it's me," she said. And then he looked at her and said, "Is that? Hey, what are you doing here?" And she said, "These are my kids." And he's like, "Huh?" So who's their father? And so he went into that camp over there. "That's home," he said. She was like, "Huh?" And so he said, "Yeah, you guys just came back." And she's like, "Oh no, what am I gonna do?" She had 19 kids for her son-in-law, yeah? So they brought him back into the community, and then the other people recognized her. And they're like, "Oh, geez." And they saw these 19 kids, and they're like, "Oh, geez, this is Iktomi. He's no warrior." Iktomi was sleeping, so they woke him up, and they banned him from that group. So they told him to leave, never come back. So you're not one of us anymore. You really broke a bunch of rules here. So different relatives, they took in these children and fed them. And after several months went by, and these kids got fat. I mean, not chubby fat. Before, they looked like skeletons. So now they're fattened up, and they're not crazy anymore. This is what happens when you only eat vegetables. You're going to go crazy. So these kids, once they start eating meat, they were okay. They weren't walking around bumping into trees, chasing butterflies, and they were like normal children after that. So the family took them in, and different families raised them. And Iktomi's wife married another man who was a good man. She wasn't mad that her first husband, Iktomi, took off with her mother because she had a good man now. And 15 years had gone by. So she lost all her feelings for Iktomi. She didn't want him there anyway. So for the mother-in-law and the children, they got to stay, and as soon as the children start eating buffalo meat, they turned out okay. They weren't bumping into trees anymore. so she's married, had 19 kids with his mother-in-law. "I captured a whole enemy tribe," he said. Oh man, it's ridiculous. But you hear this in Lakota, it's so much funnier because it uses words that sound funny. When you hear that word and you picture this in your mind, these really off kids bumping into trees and oh man, this is crazy. See, that's an example of a funny Iktomi story. Oh my gosh, that one just makes me laugh. "I captured a whole tribe," he said. They're his own kids. Oh shit, that one's crazy. Oh, for crying out loud. Every time I think of that, to me that's one of the funniest ones, yes. They married his mother-in-law. 19 kids. See? In the Catholic Church, he would be a hero, yeah? That should say something about the Catholic Church.
When you touch my sweet leg, it makes me tremble all over. Don't do that, it tickles me. When your hand touches there, when I am unawares, don't do that, it tickles me. Don't do that, don't do that, it tickles me. Don't do that, don't do that, it tickles me. When you whisper in my ear with a breath of 3-2 beer, don't do that, it tickles me. When you kiss me where it counts, your tongue, it moves around, don't do that, it tickles me. Hättest ni ätjes duale. Hättest ni wange. Don't do that, it tickles me.
Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this video. I really appreciate it. And if you would like to send a special thanks in support of this channel, look at the bottom of this video where the title is, and right under that, where it says like, dislike, and share, right in that area, slide it towards the left. And you will see the symbols change, and then you will see a heart-shaped button that says thanks on it. If you would like to click on there to send your thanks of support, I would really appreciate it, as I really do enjoy making these videos and speaking with you and spending some time with you. So again, thank you very much for listening. To learn more about Lakota spirituality, I have written a book called Wichocha Otechike. This book also includes Lakota star knowledge information. All the videos that I make, which are about Lakota spirituality, Lakota star knowledge, and cultural information, are based on this book. This book costs $99 American.
This price includes the shipping cost as well as a tracking number. And to learn more about Lakota language, I have written a Lakota language book called Chante Etanha Owoglake, Speaking from the Heart. And all my Lakota language videos are based on this book. This book costs 119 American dollars. This price includes the shipping cost as well as a tracking number. I also teach online and I give spiritual consultations as well. If you are interested in any of my services and products, you can send payment via PayPal to my email address, which is hehaka7@yahoo.com. That's HEHAKA, the number 7@yahoo.com. When you send your payment, please include your shipping address and your email address. Ho, Lila Pilamayelo. Thank you very much. In the Lakota way, everything is circular. As a result, we do not have a word for goodbye in the Lakota language. And so instead we say until next time, which in Lakota is Doksha Ake. And I will catch you in the next video.